The sound of skin hitting skin echoed across the backyard barbecue like a gunshot. I watched my 7-year-old son Ethan's head snap to the side, his small body stumbling backward into the picnic table. The red handprint bloomed across his cheek. Instantly, angry and swollen. My cousin Victoria stood over him, her manicured nails still curled into a fist, her face twisted with the kind of rage that makes people dangerous. I'd love to know which corner of the globe you're watching from. And if this story speaks to you, make sure to subscribe. Tomorrow's video is one you absolutely can't miss. That's what happens when you don't listen to adults, she hissed, her voice carrying across the suddenly silent gathering of 30-plus family members. Ice cubes clinked in forgotten drinks. Someone's phone was still playing music, but nobody moved to turn it off. The smell of burning hamburgers filled the air as Uncle Raymond forgot about the grill, his spatula hanging limp in his hand. Ethan's lip trembled, but he didn't cry. Not yet. He just looked at me with those wide brown eyes, the same ones that had trusted me to keep him safe when we walked through these gates an hour ago. The same eyes that had lit up when he saw the bounce house and the pool, when he'd tugged on my sleeve and whispered, "Mom, this is going to be the best day ever." My name is Lyra, and if you think this story ends with an apology and family forgiveness, you don't know what happens when you assault a federal agent's child. Victoria wasn't finished. She grabbed Ethan's shoulder, her fingers digging in hard enough to leave marks. "Look at me when I'm talking to you, you little brat. Your mother clearly never taught you any manners." She shook him, and that's when something inside me snapped. Not the hot, reckless anger that makes you say things you regret. This was different. This was the cold, calculating fury that comes from years of training, years of knowing exactly how much damage a human body can take before it breaks. But before I could move, before I could cross those 15 feet of perfectly manicured lawn, my husband appeared. Marcus had been inside getting more ice, but he moved through the sliding glass door like liquid shadow, his 6'3" frame filling the doorway. He didn't run. He didn't shout. He simply walked across the grass with the measured precision of someone who'd spent 15 years learning how to neutralize threats without causing a scene. His hand landed on Victoria's wrist with the gentle pressure of someone helping an elderly woman cross the street. But I saw her face go white. I saw her fingers release Ethan's shoulder immediately, saw her step back with the sudden understanding that she'd just crossed a line she didn't even know existed. "Ma'am," Marcus said, his voice carrying that particular blend of southern courtesy and Arctic warning that made grown men in three-piece suits break out in cold sweats during congressional hearings. "I need you to take several steps back from my son." Victoria laughed. Actually, I laughed. The sound was sharp and bitter, cutting through the thick August air like broken glass. "Your son? This little monster just knocked over my purse and scattered my things everywhere. Someone needs to teach him some respect." I looked around the yard, scanning the scattered contents of Victoria's designer handbag. Lipstick, car keys, breath mints, and something that made my blood run cold. A small glass vial, no bigger than my thumb, filled with what looked like white powder. It had rolled under the beverage table, partially hidden by a red Solo cup, but I could see it clearly from where I stood. Marcus saw it too. His entire body language shifted in a way that would be invisible to civilians but screamed federal alert to anyone with clearance. His hand moved to his hip in a gesture that looked casual, like he was adjusting his shirt, but I knew he was confirming the position of his off-duty weapon. "Ethan," he said, never taking his eyes off Victoria, "come over here to your mother." But Victoria stepped sideways, blocking Ethan's path. "He's not going anywhere until he apologizes for ruining my things and learns some basic human decency." What kind of parents raise a child to be so destructive? That's when Aunt Helena finally found her voice. She'd been standing by the dessert table, fork halfway to her mouth, vanilla cake crumbs scattered across her floral print dress. "Victoria, honey, he's just a little boy. Maybe we should all just shut up, Helena," Victoria snapped. This is exactly the problem with this family. Nobody ever holds anyone accountable. Look at Lyra, thinks she's so much better than the rest of us with her fancy government job and her military husband. But she can't even control her own child. The irony wasn't lost on me. Victoria had no idea that my fancy government job involved tracking international money laundering operations, or that Marcus's military background currently included running counterintelligence operations that most senators weren't cleared to know about. She had no idea that the quiet couple who sent Christmas cards and brought store-bought potato salad to family gatherings spent their working hours in rooms where people's lives were measured in classified documents and threat assessments. Marcus took another step forward. And Victoria raised her hand again, this time aimed at his chest. "Don't you dare try to intimidate me. I know my rights." "Yes, ma'am," Marcus said, his tone remaining perfectly level. "I'm sure you do. Just like you know that striking a child constitutes assault in the state of Texas, and that interfering with a federal employee's family can escalate into a very different conversation very quickly. The color drained from Victoria's face. Around the yard, conversation stopped mid-sentence. Uncle Raymond finally turned off the grill. Cousin Jennifer put down her phone. The children in the bounce house seemed to sense the shift in the air, and climbed out, huddling near their parents with the instinctive understanding that something was very wrong. Federal employee? Victoria's voice cracked slightly. You're a mechanic at the army base. Marcus smiled, but it wasn't the warm expression our friends knew. This was the smile he used during interrogations, the one that made hardened criminals start calculating plea bargains. I'm many things, ma'am. And right now, I'm a father whose son has been assaulted at a family gathering while illegal substances are scattered across the ground near children. Victoria followed his gaze to the vial under the table. Her face went from pale to gray. I don't know what that is. Someone else must have dropped it. I'm sure that's true, Marcus said. Just like I'm sure you have a perfectly reasonable explanation for why your hands are shaking and your pupils are dilated despite being in direct sunlight. I watched my cousin's carefully constructed facade begin to crumble. The designer clothes, the perfect makeup, the entitled attitude. It was all starting to slide away like makeup in the rain. Underneath was something desperate and dangerous, the kind of desperation that made people do unpredictable things. Ethan finally broke free from the invisible barrier Victoria had created and ran to me, wrapping his arms around my legs. I could feel him trembling, and could smell the fierce sweat in his hair. His cheek was still red, still swollen, but what broke my heart was the confusion in his eyes. He didn't understand why someone who was supposed to be family had hurt him. He didn't understand why the adults were standing around talking instead of making it better. Mommy, he whispered, why did she hit me? I didn't mean to knock over her purse. I was just trying to get my ball. That's when I noticed the soccer ball, still sitting in the flower bed where it had rolled after bouncing off the patio table. Ethan hadn't been destructive or disrespectful. He'd been playing the way 7-year-olds do at family gatherings, and his ball had accidentally knocked over Victoria's purse. A normal adult would have smiled, maybe helped him retrieve the ball, possibly used it as an opportunity to engage with a child. Victoria had chosen violence. Marcus was still watching her with the patient intensity of a predator. Ma'am, I'm going to need you to remain exactly where you are while I make a phone call. You can't detain me, Victoria said, but her voice lacked conviction. This is private property, and I haven't done anything wrong. You're right, Marcus agreed. This is private property. Specifically, it belongs to my wife's uncle, who invited us here for a family gathering. You assaulted a minor child in front of 30 witnesses. You're in possession of what appears to be a controlled substance. And you're currently interfering with a federal investigation. Federal investigation? Uncle Raymond finally found his voice. Marcus, what are you talking about? This is just a family barbecue. Marcus never looked away from Victoria. Sir, with respect, this stopped being just a family barbecue the moment your niece decided to assault my son and scatter narcotics near children. This is now a crime scene, and I'm required by federal law to secure it and contact the appropriate authorities. Victoria made a sound that was half laugh, half sob. You're insane. You're both insane. It's a family dispute. Nobody's going to press charges over a little slap. Ma'am, Marcus said, pulling out his phone, you might be surprised what people will press charges for when their child's safety is threatened. Especially when those people have federal clearance and access to resources you can't imagine. He speed dialed a number, never taking his eyes off Victoria. When someone answered, his voice shifted into the crisp, professional tone I'd heard him use during briefings at Langley. This is Agent Marcus Thorne, badge number 77429. I need a tactical response team and a narcotics unit at 1247 Oakwood Drive, Houston, Texas. We have an assault on a minor, suspected controlled substances, and a potentially unstable subject who may be under the influence. The silence that followed was so complete I could hear the neighbor's sprinkler system 3 houses away. Victoria's mouth opened and closed like a fish out of water. Uncle Raymond dropped his spatula. Aunt Helena sat down heavily in a lawn chair, her face the color of old parchment. Marcus, I said quietly, are you sure we need, Lyra, he interrupted. His tone gentle but firm, someone assaulted our son and is in possession of illegal narcotics at a family gathering with children present. This isn't about family politics anymore. This is about child safety and federal law. Victoria suddenly lurched forward, making a grab for the vial under the table. She wasn't fast enough. Marcus moved with the fluid precision of 15 years of tactical training, intercepting her before she could reach it. He didn't hurt her, didn't even touch her roughly, but suddenly she was standing upright with her hands pressed firmly against her sides, looking very much like someone who just realized they were completely out of their depth. "Ma'am," he said, "I strongly advise you not to tamper with evidence." "Evidence?" Victoria's voice was climbing toward hysteria. "Evidence of what?" "This is harassment. This is abuse of power. I'm going to sue you. I'm going to sue all of you." A lot of love and effort went into bringing this story to life. If you're enjoying it, we'd be so grateful if you'd subscribe to our channel. Now, back to where we left off. "You're welcome to try," Marcus said. "Though I should mention that federal agents are generally protected from civil suits when acting in their official capacity to protect children from assault and drug-related crimes." In the distance, I could hear sirens. Multiple vehicles, getting closer. Victoria heard them too, and something in her expression shifted from defiance to pure panic. "This is insane," she whispered. "It was just a slap. Kids get slapped all the time. It's called discipline." "Ma'am," Marcus said, "children get disciplined by their parents or legal guardians. What you did is called assault, and in the state of Texas, assault against a child carries enhanced penalties, especially when controlled substances are involved." The sirens were getting louder. Victoria looked around the yard desperately, as if searching for an escape route or an ally. But the family members who had always enabled her behavior, who had always made excuses for her outbursts, were backing away. Uncle Raymond was gathering his grandchildren, ushering them toward the house. Cousin Jennifer was recording everything on her phone. Aunt Helena was crying quietly into her napkin. "Please," Victoria said, and for the first time, her voice sounded genuinely frightened. "Please, I didn't mean to hurt him. I've been having a really hard time lately, and I lost my temper. Can't we just handle this as a family?" Marcus looked at her with something that might have been pity. "Ma'am, you lost the right to handle this as a family when you decided to strike a child and bring illegal drugs to a gathering with minors present. This is bigger than hurt feelings and family drama now." The first police car pulled into the driveway, followed by a second, then a third. These weren't regular patrol units, these were tactical vehicles with specialized equipment and officers who moved with the coordinated precision of people who dealt with federal cases on a regular basis. Victoria was shaking now, visibly trembling, as the weight of her situation began to sink in. "I want a lawyer," she said. "I want a lawyer right now." "That's absolutely your right," Marcus agreed. "Though I should mention that when federal agents are involved, the charges tend to be more comprehensive than simple assault. Drug possession near minors, interfering with a federal employee, potential child endangerment, these things add up quickly." As the officers approached, Victoria made one last desperate attempt to control the narrative. "He's my family," she said, pointing at me. "Tell them, Lyra. Tell them this is just a family disagreement. Tell them you don't want to press charges." I looked at my son, still clinging to my leg, still bearing the red mark of her hand on his face. I thought about all the family gatherings where Victoria's behavior had been excused, normalized, swept under the rug in the name of keeping peace. I thought about the message that would send to Ethan, that family members were allowed to hurt him, that his safety mattered less than avoiding conflict. "Officer," I said to the approaching tactical team leader, "I want to press full charges for assault against my son. And I believe you'll find controlled substances that were scattered." When she became agitated and grabbed my child, Victoria let out a sound that was pure anguish, the cry of someone who just realized that actions have consequences, and that sometimes those consequences are delivered by people with badges and federal authority. The story was just beginning. The tactical team moved with surgical precision across Uncle Raymond's backyard, their movements coordinated and efficient. Within minutes, they had secured the scene, photographed the scattered contents of Victoria's purse, and carefully bagged the glass vial that would later test positive for methamphetamine. Victoria sat in the back of a patrol car, her designer sundress wrinkled, her perfect makeup streaked with tears and mascara, but as I watched the officers work, holding Ethan close while Marcus provided his statement, a different kind of clarity began to emerge. This wasn't the first time Victoria had crossed dangerous lines. This was just the first time she'd done it in front of someone with the authority and resources to respond appropriately. Detective Sarachan approached us, her notebook already filled with preliminary details. She was young, maybe early 30s. But her eyes held the kind of sharp intelligence that made me understand why she'd been assigned to work with federal agents on what could have been a simple family dispute. "Mrs. Thorne," she said, "I need to ask you some questions about your cousin's behavior patterns." Agent Thorne mentioned this might not be an isolated incident. I glanced at Marcus, who nodded slightly. In our 15 years of marriage, I'd learned to read his expressions like a specialized language. This particular look meant, tell her everything. Hold nothing back, this is bigger than we initially realized. Victoria has always been explosive, I began, choosing my words carefully. But it's gotten worse over the past 2 years. Much worse. Detective Chen's pen paused over her notebook. Can you be more specific? I thought back to Christmas dinner 18 months ago. Victoria had arrived 3 hours late, her pupils dilated despite the bright dining room lighting. She'd immediately launched into a screaming match with our cousin Michael about his new girlfriend, calling her a series of names that made the children cry and the adults stare into their plates. When Michael's girlfriend politely excused herself to the bathroom, Victoria had followed her and, according to whispered family gossip later, cornered her in the hallway to deliver what she called some hard truths about gold-digging whores. Last Christmas, I said, she verbally assaulted Michael's girlfriend so aggressively that the young woman left in tears. The family chalked it up to Victoria being protective of Michael, but it was really about control and cruelty. Detective Chen made notes. What about interactions with children specifically? That question opened a floodgate of memories I'd been suppressing for years. My nephew Tyler's 8th birthday party, about 14 months ago. Victoria brought him a gift. A remote control helicopter that was clearly meant for older children. When Tyler couldn't operate it properly and it crashed into her car, she grabbed him by the arm hard enough to leave finger-shaped bruises and screamed at him for being ungrateful and stupid. I remembered how Tyler's mother, my cousin Amanda, had rushed to intervene, only to be told by Victoria that she was raising a weak, worthless child who would never amount to anything. The incident had ended with Amanda taking Tyler home early, but not before Victoria had thrown the broken helicopter pieces at their car as they drove away. Did anyone report that incident? Detective Chen asked. No. Amanda was embarrassed, and the family convinced her it would just cause more drama. Victoria apologized through text the next day, claiming she'd been having a hard time at work and didn't mean to lose her temper. Marcus stepped closer, his protective instincts clearly activated by these revelations. Lyra, why didn't you tell me about Tyler? Because nothing happened, I said, then immediately realized how that sounded. I mean, nothing was done about it. Amanda brushed it off. Uncle Raymond said Victoria was just going through a rough patch with her divorce, and Aunt Helena actually blamed Tyler for not being more careful with the toy. Detective Chen looked up from her notes. This is a pattern of family members minimizing her aggressive behavior toward children. It's more than that, I said, the pieces finally clicking together in my mind. It's a pattern of Victoria targeting the most vulnerable people in any situation, then having her behavior excused by the adults who should be protecting those people. I told Detective Chen about Victoria's treatment of our elderly grandmother during her final months. How she'd borrowed money from Grandma's purse during visits, always with elaborate explanations about emergencies and promises to pay it back. How she'd screamed at the 93-year-old woman for being too slow getting to the dinner table, then justified it by saying Grandma needed to maintain her independence. She stole from a woman with dementia? Detective Chen's professional composure cracked slightly. Repeatedly. And when I confronted her about it, she told me I was being paranoid and that Grandma had offered her the money. When I suggested we ask Grandma directly, Victoria became furious and accused me of trying to turn the family against her. Marcus was recording everything on his phone now, his federal training kicking in. What happened when your grandmother passed away? Victoria showed up to the funeral high, I said flatly. Not drunk, high. Her pupils were pinpoints, she was twitchy and paranoid, and she kept insisting that Grandma had promised to leave her the antique jewelry collection. When the will was read and everything went to Grandma's children equally, Victoria accused the lawyer of fraud and threatened to contest it. Detective Chen made more notes. Did she follow through on that threat? She tried, but the lawyer had recorded video testimony from Grandma specifically stating that Victoria was not to receive any inheritance due to concerning behavior patterns and substance abuse issues. The revelation hung in the air between us. Even as I said it, I realized this was the first time I'd spoken these facts out loud, connected the dots that had been scattered across years of family gatherings and suppressed conversations. Mrs. Thorne, Detective Chen said carefully, do you believe your cousin has been struggling with addiction for an extended period? Before I could answer, Uncle Raymond approached our group. His face was pale, his hands shaking slightly as he clutched a crumpled napkin. Lyra, honey, I need to tell you something. About Victoria. Marcus stepped protectively closer to me and Ethan. Sir, Detective Chen is conducting an interview. If you have information relevant to today's incident, I do, Uncle Raymond interrupted. I should have said something earlier, but I was hoping she'd get help on her own. Detective Chen flipped to a fresh page in her notebook. What kind of information, Mr. Caldwell? Uncle Raymond looked around the yard, where crime Scene technicians were still processing evidence and family members huddled in confused clusters. Victoria lost her job 6 weeks ago. Her supervisor called me because I was listed as her emergency contact. She'd been caught stealing from the employee break room, people's lunches, cash from purses, even medication from a diabetic coworker. The words hit me like a physical blow. Victoria had worked, as a receptionist at an elementary school. She'd had access to children, to their personal information, to their sense of safety and trust. They didn't press charges, Uncle Raymond continued, because the principal felt sorry for her. They thought she was having financial troubles because of her divorce. But after she was fired, other things started coming to light. Detective Chen's pen was moving rapidly. What kinds of things? Parents complained that she'd been aggressive with their children during pickup and drop-off. One mother said Victoria had grabbed her 5-year-old daughter's arm when the little girl couldn't find her backpack fast enough. Another said Victoria had called her son stupid when he forgot his lunch money. I felt sick. Raymond, why didn't anyone tell me this? Because you work for the government, honey. We were afraid. We were afraid you'd have to report it, and we didn't want Victoria to get in legal trouble. We thought we could handle it as a family. Marcus's expression had shifted into what I recognized as his interrogation mode. Mr. Caldwell, did the school file any reports about these incidents? I don't think so. The principal said they handled it internally and that firing her was sufficient consequence. Detective Chen looked up sharply. Sir, a school employee being aggressive with children is absolutely reportable. There are mandatory reporting laws that require, I know, Uncle Raymond said miserably. I know that now. But at the time, we just wanted to help Victoria get back on her feet. Her ex-husband had cleaned out their joint bank account, she was living in a studio apartment, and we thought the job loss was just adding stress to an already difficult situation. What about the drug use? Marcus asked bluntly. When did that start? Uncle Raymond's face crumpled. I first suspected something about a year ago. She'd show up to family events talking too fast, picking at her skin, unable to sit still. But when I asked her about it, she said she was taking prescription medication for anxiety and depression. Did you ever see these prescriptions? Detective Chen asked. No, and when Helena suggested Victoria see our family doctor for a second opinion, Victoria exploded. She accused us of not trusting her, said we were treating her like a child, and stormed out. She didn't speak to any of us for 3 months. The pattern was becoming clearer and more disturbing. Victoria hadn't just assaulted my son today, she'd been escalating toward this moment for months, possibly years. And the family's well-intentioned desire to handle it internally had enabled her to continue having access to vulnerable people while her behavior became increasingly dangerous. There's something else, Uncle Raymond said quietly. About 2 weeks ago, Victoria asked me for money. $5,000. She said it was for rent and car repairs, but when I offered to pay the landlord and mechanic directly, she became enraged. She said I didn't trust her, that I was treating her like a criminal. Did you give her the money? I asked. No. But Helena did. She withdrew it from their retirement account and gave it to Victoria without telling me until afterward. Detective Chen's expression had grown increasingly serious. Mr. Caldwell, do you have any idea what your niece actually used that money for? Uncle Raymond looked toward the patrol car where Victoria sat, her head in her hands. I'm starting to think I don't want to know. At that moment, one of the crime scene technicians approached Detective Chen with a clear evidence bag. Inside was Victoria's cell phone, and the screen was lit up with notifications. Even from several feet away, I could see dozens of unread text messages, many marked as urgent. Detective, the technician said, the subject's phone has been receiving continuous messages since we secured it. The preview text visually suggests these might be related to drug transactions. Detective Chen nodded grimly. We'll need a warrant for the full content, but the preview information could be relevant to establishing a pattern of behavior. Marcus pulled out his own phone and stepped away to make a call. I could hear fragments of his conversation, references to federal databases, background checks, and something about cross-referencing with school employment records. When he returned, his expression was grave. Lyra, he said quietly, I need to tell you something. And Raymond, you need to hear this, too. Detective Chen looked up from her notes. Agent Thorne? I ran Victoria's name through our federal databases. She's been flagged in 3 different states for suspicious activity related to schools and children's programs. Nothing prosecuted, but enough reports to create a pattern recognition alert. The words seemed to echo in the sudden silence. Uncle Raymond made a sound like air being forced out of his lungs. What kind of reports? inappropriate interactions with minors, theft from educational institutions, and suspected substance abuse while working in positions of trust with children. The report spanned the last 18 months across Texas, Oklahoma, and Arkansas. I realized I was holding Ethan tighter than necessary and forced myself to loosen my grip. She's been moving around, taking jobs at different schools? It appears so. Each time she was terminated or resigned under pressure, she'd relocate and find similar employment elsewhere. Without a criminal conviction, there was nothing to prevent her from passing basic background checks. Detective Chen was writing furiously. Agent Thorne, this information suggests a much larger pattern of predatory behavior than a single assault incident. Exactly. Which means today's attack on Ethan wasn't an isolated loss of temper. It was an escalation in an established pattern of targeting children when she's under the influence or experiencing stress. Uncle Raymond sat down heavily on a nearby picnic bench. We enabled this. All of us. Every time we made excuses for her, every time we told victims to just avoid her or brush it off, we were enabling her to continue hurting people. Mr. Caldwell, Detective Chen said gently, the important thing is that you're providing this information now. It will help ensure that Victoria gets appropriate intervention and that other potential victims are protected. As if summoned by our conversation, Aunt Helena approached our group. Her eyes were red from crying, and she clutched her purse like a shield. Lyra, honey, I need to ask you something. As a favor to the family. Marcus stepped slightly forward, his body language shifting into protective mode. Mrs. Caldwell. Please, Helena continued, don't let this go too far. Victoria is sick, she needs help, not prison. Can't we work something out? Maybe she could go to rehab, get counseling, make amends? The request hung in the air like smoke from the abandoned grill. I looked at my son, still clinging to my leg, still bearing the mark of Victoria's hand on his face. I thought about Tyler's bruises, about the elementary school children who'd been called stupid, about my grandmother's missing money and the parents who'd complained about aggressive behavior. Helena, I said slowly, what you're asking is for me to prioritize Victoria's comfort over children's safety. You're asking me to enable the same pattern that's been going on for years. She's family, Helena said desperately. So is Ethan. I replied. And unlike Victoria, he's never hurt anyone. The conversation was interrupted by Detective Chen's radio crackling to life. The voice on the other end was speaking in police codes, but I caught enough to understand that Victoria's blood test had come back positive for methamphetamine, and that the search of her vehicle had yielded additional controlled substances. The family reunion was officially over. But the reckoning was just beginning. The next morning, I woke to the sound of Marcus speaking in hushed tones on the phone in our kitchen. Through the partially open bedroom door, I could hear fragments of conversation that made my blood pressure spike: multi-state investigation, federal task force, and child endangerment conspiracy. Ethan was still asleep beside me, his small body curled against my side like he was afraid I might disappear. The swelling on his cheek had gone down overnight, but the bruise had deepened to an angry purple that made my chest tight with protective fury. He'd woken up twice during the night, once asking if the mean lady was coming back, and once simply crying without explanation. I slipped out of bed carefully, pulled on my robe, and padded to the kitchen where Marcus was ending his call. His expression was grim, the kind of focused intensity he usually reserved for national security briefings. Tell me, I said simply. Marcus poured coffee into my favorite mug, the one Ethan had made me for Mother's Day with his handprints painted on the sides. Victoria's situation is significantly more complex than a simple assault and possession charge. He sat across from me at our kitchen table, the same table where we'd helped Ethan with homework just 2 days ago, where normal family life had existed before yesterday's explosion of violence and revelation. The drugs found in her possession weren't just for personal use, Marcus continued. The quantity and packaging suggest intent to distribute. But more concerning is what we found when we cross-referenced her employment history with the federal database. I wrapped my hands around the warm mug, needing the anchor of something solid and familiar. What did you find? Victoria has been systematically targeting schools and children's programs for the past 3 years, not 18 months like I initially told Detective Chen. Each time she'd get hired, work just long enough to establish trust and access, then begin a pattern of theft, intimidation, and what appears to be grooming behavior. The coffee suddenly tasted bitter. Grooming behavior? Marcus pulled out his tablet and showed me a document marked with federal classification headers. In Oklahoma, she was terminated from an after-school program when parents complained that she was taking photographs of children during activities without permission. The photos were never found, but multiple witnesses reported that she'd specifically target children who seemed withdrawn or had difficult home situations. My hand started shaking, and I set the mug down before I could drop it. Marcus, are you saying? I'm saying that yesterday's assault on Ethan wasn't random violence. It was Victoria testing boundaries in front of her family, seeing how much she could get away with when she had the perceived protection of family loyalty. The implications hit me like a physical blow. Victoria hadn't just snapped at a family gathering. She'd been calculating, predatory, using our family reunion as a hunting ground to assess vulnerability and response. There's more, Marcus said. Gently. The task force ran her financial records overnight. In the past 6 months, she's received over $30,000 in cash deposits that don't correspond to any documented employment or legitimate income source. I thought about the $5,000 Aunt Helena had given her, about Uncle Raymond's suspicions, about all the family members who'd been quietly supporting Victoria while she spiraled deeper into criminality. She's been using family sympathy to fund a drug operation, I said, the words feeling surreal as they left my mouth. That's our working theory. And the schools weren't just employment opportunities, they were recruitment centers. Children from troubled homes, kids who might not be believed if they reported inappropriate contact, families who were already struggling and might be susceptible to financial incentives. My phone buzzed with a text message. It was from my cousin Amanda, Tyler's mother. Lyra, I need to talk to you about Victoria. It's urgent. I showed Marcus the message. He nodded grimly. The task force contacted all family members last night. Amanda was asked to bring Tyler in for an interview this morning. An interview? Marcus, Tyler is 9 years old. I know. But there are trained child advocates who specialize in these situations. If Victoria has been targeting children in our family as well as at her job sites, we need to know the extent of it. My phone rang before I could respond. Amanda's name flashed on the screen, and I could hear her crying before I even said hello. Lyra, she sobbed, Tyler told me something last night after the police left. Something about Victoria that I should have reported months ago. I put the call on speaker so Marcus could hear. Amanda, what did Tyler say? Remember Victoria's birthday party last spring? The one at the community center where she rented the pool. I did remember. Victoria had insisted on throwing herself an elaborate 30-second birthday party, complete with a DJ and catered food. It had seemed excessive for someone who claimed to be struggling financially, but the family had attended to keep peace. Tyler said Victoria took him and 2 other kids into the storage room that day, Amanda continued. She told them she had special birthday presents for the good kids who could keep secrets. Marcus was already typing notes into his phone, his federal training taking over. Amanda, did Tyler tell you what happened in that storage room? She showed them pictures on her phone. Tyler said they were weird pictures of kids without clothes on. When he told her he wanted to leave, she grabbed his arm and told him that if he told anyone about the special presents, she'd make sure something bad happened to his parents. The kitchen felt like it was spinning around me. Victoria hadn't just been stealing money and abusing drugs. She'd been systematically grooming children, using family gatherings as cover for predatory behavior. Amanda, I said, forcing my voice to remain steady, did Tyler tell you anything else? She gave him $50 and told him it was their special secret. She said if he ever needed more money, he could earn it by being a really good secret keeper. Lyra, I thought it was just Victoria being weird with money like always. I told Tyler to give the money back, but I didn't think. Her voice broke completely. You couldn't have known, I said, though my own guilt was crushing. None of us understood what we were looking at. Marcus leaned toward the phone. Amanda, this is Marcus. I need you to bring Tyler to the federal building this morning. There are people trained to talk to children about these situations, and we need to document everything Tyler remembers. Is Tyler in trouble? Amanda asked. Tyler is a victim, Marcus said firmly. He's brave for telling you the truth, and we're going to make sure he's safe. After Amanda hung up, Marcus and I sat in stunned silence. Through the living room window, I could see our neighbor Mrs. Patterson, walking her golden retriever, completely unaware that the world had shifted on its axis overnight. How many children? I whispered. We don't know yet. But the task force is interviewing families from all 3 states where Victoria worked. The initial count is looking at potentially dozens of victims. I thought about yesterday's barbecue. About all the family members who'd watched Victoria assault Ethan and done nothing until Marcus intervened. About Uncle Raymond's reluctance to cause drama, about Aunt Helena's insistence that we handle things internally. They enabled this, I said. Our family enabled a predator because they were more concerned with avoiding conflict than protecting children. Lyra, Marcus said carefully, there's something else you need to know. Something about why this investigation is being handled at the federal level. I looked at him, seeing something in his expression that made my stomach drop. What? 1. Of the victims identified from Victoria's Oklahoma employment was the daughter of a Navy intelligence officer. When that child disclosed abuse, it triggered a national security review because Victoria had been asking questions about the father's work, trying to get information about base security and personnel schedules. The implications crashed over me like a wave. She was using child victims to gather intelligence information? It appears so. The working theory is that she was being paid not just for drug distribution, but for gathering sensitive information from military and government families whose children she had access to. I felt physically sick. Victoria hadn't just been a family embarrassment with addiction problems. She'd been operating a sophisticated criminal enterprise that targeted the most vulnerable members of families with national security clearances. Marcus, if she was targeting government families, and she knew about your job, that's why federal agents responded so quickly yesterday, he said grimly. The moment I identified myself and mentioned Victoria's behavior, it triggered protocols for potential security breaches. My phone buzzed again. This time it was a number I didn't recognize, but the text message made my blood freeze. Your husband made a big mistake yesterday. Some people don't like federal agents who interfere with business arrangements. You should be more careful about who you trust with your child's safety. Marcus read the message over my shoulder, and I watched his entire demeanor shift into combat mode. He was already dialing a number, speaking in rapid federal codes that I recognized as emergency threat assessments. We're going into protective protocol, he said, ending the call. Pack a bag for you and Ethan. We're moving to a safe house within the hour. A safe house? Marcus, what does that message mean? It means Victoria wasn't working alone, and whoever her partners are just declared war on a federal agent's family. As if responding to some invisible signal, black SUVs began pulling into our driveway. Men and women in tactical gear emerged, moving with the coordinated precision of people who dealt with national security threats on a daily basis. Lyra, Marcus said, his voice carrying the authority of 15 years of federal service, this stopped being about family drama the moment Victoria targeted our son. Now it's about dismantling a criminal organization that's been using child abuse to compromise national security. I ran upstairs to wake Ethan, my mind reeling with the understanding that yesterday's barbecue assault had been the tip of an iceberg that threatened everything we'd built as a family. Victoria hadn't just slapped my son. She'd drawn us into a war we didn't even know was being fought, but as I looked at my sleeping child, at the bruise that would fade but the trauma that would require careful healing, I felt something crystallize inside me. Victoria and her criminal partners had made a fundamental miscalculation. They'd threatened a federal agent's family, thinking it would make us back down. Instead, they'd just activated every resource the United States government had for protecting its own and pursuing justice for crimes against children. The reckoning they'd unleashed was about to be far more comprehensive than they could possibly imagine. As I gently shook Ethan awake, I heard Marcus on the phone downstairs, coordinating with agencies whose names I recognized from his classified briefings. The quiet suburban morning was about to become something very different. Mommy, Ethan said sleepily, are we going somewhere? Yes, baby, I said, helping him into his clothes. We're going somewhere safe while Daddy makes sure the bad people can't hurt anyone else. Through the window, I could see more vehicles arriving, official plates and government tags. The neighbor's golden retriever was barking at the unusual activity, and Mrs. Patterson was standing in her yard, clearly concerned about the federal response team that had suddenly surrounded our quiet street. This was no longer about Victoria's drug problem or family dysfunction. This was about national security, child trafficking, and the kind of systematic evil that required federal resources to combat effectively, but most importantly, this was about ensuring that Ethan and children like Tyler and all the other victims would never again be vulnerable to predators who used family loyalty as camouflage for unspeakable crimes. The war Victoria's criminal organization had started was about to end in a way they never anticipated. Federal agents don't just arrest perpetrators. They dismantle entire networks, protect every victim, and ensure that justice is both swift and comprehensive. Victoria had slapped the wrong child at the wrong family gathering. Now she was about to discover what happens when you declare war on people who've dedicated their lives to protecting the innocent and serving justice. The safe house would be temporary, but the reckoning would be permanent. The safe house looked like any other suburban home in Northern Virginia, complete with a white picket fence and flower pots on the front porch. But the basement contained communication equipment that could reach satellite networks across 3 continents, and the seemingly ordinary neighbors were federal agents maintaining cover identities. Ethan adapted to our temporary relocation with the resilience that children possess when their parents project calm authority. He'd asked a few questions about the special vacation house, accepting my explanation that Daddy needed to work on an important case that required us to stay somewhere extra safe. It was during our second night at the safe house that Marcus came home with a manila folder that would change everything we thought we knew about Victoria's criminal network. "Lyra," he said, settling beside me on the couch after Ethan had gone to bed, "we need to talk about what the task force discovered today." I set aside the book I'd been pretending to read and focused on my husband's expression. 15 years of marriage had taught me to recognize when Marcus was about to deliver information that would fundamentally alter our understanding of a situation. "Victoria's arrest triggered something we didn't anticipate," he began. "When federal agents processed her phone and financial records, they uncovered communications that led us to a much larger operation." He opened the folder and showed me a series of photographs that made my stomach clench. They were surveillance images of various school buildings, community centers, and family gathering locations across multiple states. Each photo was marked with handwritten notes in Victoria's distinctive cursive. "She was documenting targets," I said, recognizing several locations from family events over the past 2 years. "More than that. She was conducting reconnaissance for a trafficking network that specializes in identifying and grooming children from specific demographic backgrounds." Marcus flipped to the next page, revealing a detailed organizational chart that looked like something from a national security briefing. At the center was a name I didn't recognize, Dr. Elena Vasquez, labeled as Network Coordinator. Branching out from her were dozens of names, including Victoria's, each connected to specific geographic regions and institutional targets. "Dr. Vasquez runs what appears to be a sophisticated child trafficking operation disguised as educational and psychological research," Marcus explained. "She recruits operatives like Victoria to infiltrate schools, daycare centers, and community organizations in areas with high concentrations of military and government families." I studied the chart, tracing the connections between names and locations. "This isn't just about drugs and petty crime. This is organized, institutional predation." "Exactly. And Victoria's role was more significant than we initially understood. She wasn't just a low-level distributor or recruiter. She was a regional coordinator responsible for identifying and vetting targets across the entire Southwest corridor." The implications were staggering. Victoria hadn't just been a troubled family member with addiction issues. She'd been a key operative in a criminal organization that had been systematically targeting children for years. "Marcus, if she was a regional coordinator, that means she had access to information about other operatives, other victims, other families being targeted. That's exactly what makes her so valuable to the investigation. And it's why her criminal partners sent that threatening message. They need Victoria silenced before she can provide information that would expose the entire network." I thought about yesterday's barbecue, about all the children who'd been present, about how Victoria had specifically targeted Ethan despite having access to multiple potential victims. "She was testing something at the reunion, wasn't she?" Marcus nodded grimly. "Our behavioral analysts believe she was conducting what they call a family response assessment. By assaulting Ethan in front of multiple family members, she was gauging how effectively the family system would protect or expose criminal behavior. And she got her answer when everyone stood around making excuses until you intervened. Right. If I hadn't been there, if I hadn't had federal authority and training, Ethan's assault would have been minimized and forgotten like Tyler's abuse, like all the other incidents the family handled internally." The folder contained additional pages that revealed the sophisticated nature of Dr. Vasquez's operation. Financial records showed payments to operatives like Victoria that totaled hundreds of thousands of dollars over multi-year periods. Communication logs revealed a network of recruiters, handlers, and transporters operating across 12 states. "How many children are we talking about?" I asked, though I wasn't sure I wanted to know the answer. "The preliminary count is over 200 identified victims across the past 5 years. But based on the scope of the operation, analysts believe the actual number could be significantly higher." I felt physically sick. Victoria hadn't just been a family embarrassment. She'd been part of an organization that had systematically destroyed the lives of hundreds of children and their families. "There's something else," Marcus said carefully. "Something that explains why this investigation became a national security priority so quickly." He turned to a section of the folder marked with classification stamps. Dr. Vasquez's operation wasn't just trafficking children for commercial exploitation. They were specifically targeting families with security clearances to gather intelligence for foreign adversaries. The words hit me like ice water. Foreign adversaries? Children of military personnel, intelligence officers, defense contractors, and government officials were being groomed not just for abuse, but to provide information about their parents' work, family schedules, travel patterns, security protocols, classified project details. I thought about the questions Victoria had asked over the years at family gatherings. Casual inquiries about Marcus's travel schedule, friendly interest in where he worked, seemingly innocent questions about whether his job was exciting or dangerous. Questions I dismissed as normal family curiosity. She was gathering intelligence on you, I said. On us? For years. And the information she collected was being sold to foreign intelligence services who used it to identify vulnerabilities in American national security infrastructure. The scope of the betrayal was overwhelming. Victoria hadn't just attacked my son. She'd been systematically compromising my husband's security clearance and potentially endangering other federal agents and their families. Marcus, if Victoria had intelligence about your work, about other agents' families, that's why this investigation has unlimited federal resources. We're not just dismantling a child trafficking network. We're conducting a counterintelligence operation to assess and repair national security breaches that may have been ongoing for years. My phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. Check your email. You need to see what your family has been hiding from you. Marcus immediately began running traces on the message while I opened my encrypted email account. There was a single new message with an attachment labeled family_truth_files. Don't open that, Marcus said sharply. It could be malware designed to compromise our secure communications. But the preview text was visible. Your cousin Victoria kept detailed records of every family member's vulnerabilities, financial situations, and personal secrets. Dr. Vasquez's organization doesn't just target children. They target entire family systems for maximum exploitation potential. Marcus was already on the phone with the task force's cybersecurity team. Within minutes, they'd analyzed the email and determined it was safe to open under controlled conditions. The attachment contained dozens of files documenting intimate details about every member of my extended family. Victoria had compiled psychological profiles, financial records, personal relationship details, and what appeared to be strategic assessments of each family member's potential value to the criminal organization. Uncle Raymond's file revealed that Victoria knew about his gambling debts and had been providing him with inside information about horse races in exchange for covering her living expenses. Aunt Helena's profile showed that Victoria had been systematically stealing her prescription medications and replacing them with placebos, potentially endangering Helena's heart condition. My cousin Michael's file contained photographs of him in compromising situations with women who weren't his wife, along with detailed documentation of the blackmail payments Victoria had been receiving to keep the information secret. She turned our family into a criminal enterprise, I said, scrolling through page after page of exploitation and manipulation. Everyone who thought they were helping her was actually being victimized. But the most devastating file was labeled with my name. Victoria had been documenting Marcus's work schedule, our family routines, Ethan's school information, and even our home security systems. She'd compiled detailed intelligence about our family's vulnerabilities that would be invaluable to anyone planning surveillance, kidnapping, or worse. Lyra, Marcus said, reading over my shoulder, look at the date stamps on these files. The documentation went back 7 years, starting shortly after Victoria's divorce. Every family gathering, every phone call, every casual conversation had been systematically mined for information that could be weaponized against us. She's been running a long-term intelligence operation against our entire family, I said, the reality settling like lead in my stomach. And yesterday's assault on Ethan was likely her final intelligence gathering mission before the network prepared to escalate their operations. The folder contained one more section that made everything click into place. Financial records showed that Dr. Vasquez's organization had been planning what they called asset activation phase, the systematic kidnapping and exploitation of high-value targets they'd been monitoring and documenting for years. Ethan's name was on the target list. So were Tyler's, Michael's daughters, and 6 other children from families with security clearances. They were going to take our children, I whispered. Victoria's assault on Ethan was likely a field test to assess family response protocols before they moved to the kidnapping phase. If our family had responded typically, making excuses, handling it internally, minimizing the incident, it would have confirmed that they could operate against us without significant resistance. I thought about Aunt Helena's plea for family forgiveness, about Uncle Raymond's desire to handle things quietly, about how close we'd come to following the same pattern that had enabled Victoria's operation for years. But you responded with federal authority instead of family dysfunction, I said. which triggered security protocols that exposed their entire operation before they could activate the final phase. Marcus's phone rang with a call from Task Force Command. The conversation was brief but intense, filled with federal codes and operational terminology that I recognized from his classified work. "Dr. Vasquez has been arrested," he said, ending the call. "They raided her compound in Nevada this morning and recovered extensive evidence documenting the full scope of the trafficking and intelligence operation." "What about the other operatives? The people who sent those threatening messages?" "Coordinated arrests are happening simultaneously across 12 states. The entire network is being dismantled as we speak." I felt a surge of satisfaction that was quickly followed by overwhelming grief for all the families who hadn't been as fortunate as ours. For all the children who'd been victimized because their parents didn't have federal resources to protect them. "Marcus, what happens to Victoria now?" "She's facing federal charges for child trafficking, espionage, conspiracy, and about 30 other felonies. But she's also providing cooperation in exchange for a reduced sentence. Her information has been crucial in identifying victims and locating other operatives." The folder contained victim impact statements from some of the children who'd been rescued during the raids. Reading their accounts of abuse, manipulation, and terror made me understand how close we'd come to losing everything we valued, but it also made me realize something else. Victoria's assault on Ethan hadn't just been a random act of violence, or even a calculated intelligence operation. It had been her final desperate attempt to maintain control over a family system that was beginning to see through her manipulation. When she struck my son, she wasn't just testing our response protocols. She was trying to reassert the power dynamic that had allowed her to operate undetected for years. She was betting that family loyalty would trump child protection, that our desire to avoid conflict would override our instinct to pursue justice. She'd miscalculated catastrophically. Instead of silencing potential witnesses, she'd activated the full investigative power of the federal government. Instead of maintaining her cover, she'd exposed an entire criminal network. Instead of proving that she could act with impunity, she demonstrated that actions have consequences, especially when those actions target the families of people who've dedicated their lives to justice. The safe house felt different that night. Not like a temporary refuge, but like a command center from which justice was being systematically delivered to people who'd believed they were untouchable. Victoria had spent years documenting our family's vulnerabilities, believing that information would make us easier to exploit and control, but she'd overlooked the most important intelligence of all. Federal agents don't just protect national security. They protect their families with every resource the United States government can provide, and when you threaten their children, you discover that those resources are more comprehensive and more relentless than any criminal organization can possibly imagine. 3 weeks after the coordinated federal raids, I stood in a windowless conference room at the FBI field office, staring at a wall-mounted display that showed the organizational structure of what the media had dubbed Operation Family Web. The investigation had uncovered one of the largest child trafficking and espionage networks in U.S. history, and I was about to play a role I never could have imagined. Special Agent Jennifer Walsh, the task force coordinator, spread a series of photographs across the conference table. Each image showed a different property that had been used by Dr. Vasquez's organization: safe houses, training facilities, and what she euphemistically called processing centers, where children were held before being trafficked or forced to gather intelligence. "Mrs. Thorne," Agent Walsh said, "we need your help with the final phase of this operation." Marcus sat beside me, his federal credentials allowing him access to briefings that would normally be far above my clearance level. "Jennifer, explain what you're asking of my wife." "Victoria has provided extensive cooperation, but there are still 12 operatives who've gone underground since the raids began. These individuals have access to sensitive intelligence that could compromise ongoing national security operations if it falls into the wrong hands." Agent Walsh pointed to a series of names on the organizational chart. "More critically, we believe they're still holding an unknown number of child victims in locations that Victoria doesn't know about." Dr. Vasquez compartmentalized her operation specifically to prevent this kind of intelligence breach. I studied the photographs of the properties that had been raided. Abandoned warehouses, suburban homes that looked identical to our safe house, even a defunct summer camp that had been converted into what investigators called a training facility for child operatives. "What exactly are you asking me to do?" I said. "We want you to help us draw the remaining operatives out of hiding," Agent Walsh replied. "Victoria's arrest and cooperation have been kept classified, but we're prepared to stage a very public family reconciliation that would appear to show the federal investigation was unfounded." The proposal was stunning in its audacity. "You want me to pretend to forgive Victoria and make it look like the charges were dropped?" "More than that. We want you to participate in a carefully orchestrated media campaign that would convince the remaining operatives that their network is still intact and that Victoria remains a trusted asset. Marcus was already shaking his head. Jennifer, you're asking my wife to paint a target on herself and our son. If these operatives believe Victoria is still operational, they'll attempt to make contact with her, Agent Walsh finished. Which will allow us to track them to their current locations and rescue any remaining victims. She pulled out another folder, this one containing surveillance photographs that made my heart race. Children who looked no older than Ethan, sitting in bare rooms with expressions of terror and resignation that no child should ever wear. These photos were recovered from devices seized during the raids, Agent Walsh said quietly. We believe there are more children being held in similar conditions. Children whose families are frantically searching for them, children who are being subjected to unimaginable trauma while we try to locate them through conventional investigation methods. I looked at the photographs, thinking about Ethan sleeping safely in our temporary bedroom down the hall, about Tyler finally receiving therapy to process his own victimization, about all the children who weren't as fortunate as ours. What would this media campaign involve? I asked. Agent Walsh activated a laptop and showed me a series of mock-up news articles and social media posts. The headlines made me nauseous. Federal agents overreact to family dispute, innocent woman vindicated after false trafficking charges. Government admits mistake in high-profile arrest. The narrative would be that Victoria was wrongfully accused due to a misunderstanding about prescription medications and family dysfunction, Agent Walsh explained. You would give interviews expressing regret about involving federal authorities, and gratitude that the real truth came to light. And Victoria would be secretly released to serve as bait for the remaining operatives, Marcus said, understanding the strategy. Under constant surveillance, with tracking devices and communication. Monitoring that would allow us to follow her contacts directly to their operational bases. I thought about the threatening messages we'd received, about the sophisticated nature of the criminal organization we were dealing with, about the very real danger that this plan would expose our family to, but I also thought about those photographs of terrified children, about families who were experiencing the nightmare of missing children while we debated strategy in a secure federal facility. There's something else you need to consider, Agent Walsh said. Victoria's cooperation has revealed that several members of your extended family were more involved in the operation than we initially understood. She opened another file that made my stomach drop. Financial records showing regular payments from Dr. Vasquez's organization to Uncle Raymond, not just for gambling debts, but for providing detailed information about family gatherings, work schedules, and security arrangements. Raymond was a paid informant? I asked. For over 3 years. He provided intelligence that allowed Victoria and other operatives to plan their reconnaissance activities around family events. Every reunion, every holiday gathering, every casual family dinner was an intelligence collection opportunity. The documentation was extensive and damning. Raymond had been paid $1,500 per month to provide what the organization called family mapping services, detailed reports about who would be attending gatherings, what kind of work they did, how many children would be present, and what security measures might be in place. That's how Victoria knew Marcus would be at the barbecue, I realized. Raymond told them about our RSVP, about the timing, about everything. And when Marcus responded with federal authority instead of family denial, it triggered a security alert that exposed Raymond's role as an intelligence asset. The folder contained recorded phone conversations between Raymond and Victoria, discussing optimal timing for what they called assessment activities, scenarios where Victoria would test family responses to various forms of child abuse and intimidation. Ethan's assault wasn't spontaneous, Marcus said, reading through the transcripts. It was a planned operation designed to test our family's protective capabilities. Exactly. And Raymond's intelligence suggested that your family would respond with typical dysfunction, making excuses, handling things internally, possibly even blaming the victim. I felt a surge of rage that surprised me with its intensity. Uncle Raymond hadn't just enabled Victoria's abuse. He'd been paid to orchestrate opportunities for her to victimize children, including his own grandchildren. Where is Raymond now? I asked. In federal custody. He was arrested during the secondary sweep after Victoria's cooperation revealed his role. He's facing charges for conspiracy, child endangerment, and providing material support to a trafficking organization. Agent Walsh showed me additional evidence that painted a picture of systematic family exploitation that went far beyond anything we'd imagined. Helena's prescription medications hadn't just been stolen, they'd been replaced with substances designed to cause cognitive impairment that would make her easier to manipulate and less likely to notice suspicious activity. Michael's blackmail situation wasn't about infidelity, The compromising photographs had been staged by Victoria using operatives posing as potential romantic partners, specifically to create leverage that could be used to control his behavior and access his defense. Contractor connections. Your entire family system was being used as an intelligence collection and money laundering operation, Agent Walsh said. Victoria wasn't just targeting individual victims. She was systematically corrupting family relationships to create a network of unwitting assets. The scope of the betrayal was overwhelming, but it also clarified something important. The decision about whether to participate in the undercover operation wasn't just about helping capture remaining criminals. It was about taking control of a narrative that had been manipulated against our family for years. If I agree to do this, I said, what kind of protection would we have? Round-the-clock surveillance, backup teams positioned within response range, and communication devices that would allow us to intervene within seconds if the situation became dangerous. Marcus was studying the operational plans with the analytical focus he brought to his own federal assignments. The risk assessment shows this plan has an 87% probability of successfully drawing out the remaining operatives within 2 weeks. And a 13% chance of something going catastrophically wrong, I added. There's always risk in operations like this, Agent Walsh acknowledged. But the alternative is allowing an unknown number of child victims to remain in captivity while we spend months or years trying to locate them through conventional investigative methods. I thought about the photographs of terrified children, about families who were living the nightmare of not knowing where their children were or whether they were still alive. About parents who would give anything for the opportunity to help rescue other people's children from similar situations. I'll do it, I said. Marcus immediately started to object, but I held up my hand. Victoria used our family gathering to assault our son as part of a systematic criminal operation. She documented our vulnerabilities for years, planning to use that intelligence to kidnap Ethan and other children we care about. She turned family relationships into weapons designed to hurt the people we love most. I looked at the organizational chart showing the scope of the trafficking network, at the photographs of victims, at the evidence of how comprehensively our family had been infiltrated and exploited. This isn't just about helping the investigation anymore. This is about taking back control of a situation that's been manipulated against us for years. Victoria bet that family loyalty would override child protection. She was wrong then, and she's going to be wrong again. Agent Walsh nodded approvingly. Mrs. Thorne, there's one more element to this operation that I think you'll find particularly satisfying. She opened a final folder containing what appeared to be financial documents and legal paperwork. When we seized Dr. Vasquez's assets, we discovered that Victoria had been paid over $400,000 for her intelligence gathering and recruitment activities over the past 5 years. The number was staggering. Victoria hadn't just been a struggling divorced woman accepting family help. She'd been earning a substantial income from victimizing children and betraying family trust. Under federal forfeiture laws, those assets are being seized to compensate victims and support ongoing protective services, Agent Walsh continued. But there's also a provision for family members who were unknowingly exploited as part of the criminal operation. She handed me a document that outlined financial compensation for what the government termed involuntary intelligence assets, family members whose personal information, routines, and relationships had been systematically exploited without their knowledge or consent. You're eligible for restitution payments that would total approximately $150,000, Agent Walsh said. Money that Dr. Vasquez's organization made by weaponizing your family relationships. The irony was perfect. Victoria had been paid to document our vulnerabilities and plan our victimization. Now that same money would be returned to us as compensation for the trauma and violation we'd experienced. There's more, Agent Walsh said. If you agree to participate in the undercover operation, successful completion would make you eligible for additional compensation under the Federal Witness Protection and Cooperation Programs. She showed me another document outlining benefits that included relocation assistance, education funding for Ethan, and ongoing security support for families who'd been targeted by international trafficking networks. The government takes care of people who help protect children and national security, Agent Walsh said. Especially when those people have been personally victimized by the criminals we're trying to stop. I looked at Marcus, seeing my own thoughts reflected in his expression. Victoria had spent years planning to destroy our family for financial gain. Now we had the opportunity to turn that same financial system against her criminal network while helping rescue children who were still being victimized. When do we start? I asked. Agent Walsh smiled with the satisfaction of someone who'd been hoping for exactly that response. The media campaign begins tomorrow morning. By tomorrow evening, every remaining operative in Dr. Vasquez's network will believe that Victoria is back in business and that the federal investigation was a complete failure. And then? Then we wait for them to make the mistake of trying to re-establish contact with their most valuable regional coordinator. Marcus was already shifting into operational planning mode. Jennifer, I want detailed briefings on every aspect of this operation. Communication protocols, backup procedures, exit strategies, everything. Absolutely. This operation has the full support of multiple federal agencies. We're not just trying to catch criminals anymore. We're dismantling a threat to national security while rescuing children whose lives depend on our success. As we left the federal building that afternoon, I realized that the barbecue assault that had started this nightmare was about to become the foundation for its resolution. Victoria had attacked Ethan believing that family dysfunction would protect her from consequences. Instead, she'd activated a federal response that would ultimately destroy the entire criminal network she'd helped build. And now she was going to serve as unwitting bait to capture the remaining operatives who'd believed they were too sophisticated to be caught. The hunt was about to begin, and this time, the predators were going to discover what it felt like to be prey. The morning news interview was scheduled for 7:30 a.m., prime time for a story that would make national headlines within hours. I sat in the television studio's green room, wearing the carefully selected outfit that FBI media specialists had chosen to project regretful family member seeking reconciliation rather than federal agent's wife executing an undercover operation. My earpiece crackled with Agent Walsh's voice providing final operational instructions. Remember, you're devastated about the family discord, grateful that the charges were dropped, and eager to rebuild relationships with Victoria. The story is that prescription medication mix-ups and family stress created a misunderstanding that spiraled out of control. Through the green room's monitor, I could see the news anchor reviewing her notes. The headline banner across the bottom of the screen read, "Exclusive, Family Speaks Out About False Federal Charges." The irony was bitter. In 3 hours, that same headline would be transmitted to criminal operatives who would interpret it as confirmation that their network remained secure. "Mrs. Thorne," the production assistant called, "we're ready for you." I walked onto the set with the measured composure of someone who'd spent weeks preparing for this performance. The anchor, Sarah Martinez, greeted me with the sympathetic expression reserved for victims of government overreach. "We're here with Lyra Thorne, whose family was torn apart by what federal authorities now admit was a tragic misunderstanding involving her cousin Victoria Caldwell," Sarah began. "Lyra, thank you for sharing your story with us. Thank you for giving me the opportunity to set the record straight," I replied, channeling genuine emotion into words that had been carefully scripted to deceive the most dangerous criminals in the country. "Tell us what really happened at that family barbecue 6 weeks ago." I took a breath, knowing that somewhere in an undisclosed location, Victoria was watching this broadcast under federal supervision, understanding her role as bait in an operation that would determine whether children lived or died. "My cousin Victoria has been struggling with depression and anxiety since her divorce 2 years ago," I said. "She'd been prescribed several medications to help cope, and we now know that she'd accidentally double-dosed before coming to our family gathering." The lie came easily, supported by genuine emotion about family trauma that was all too real. "When my son Ethan accidentally knocked over her purse, the medication made Victoria react more aggressively than she ever would have normally. It was completely out of character for her. But federal agents arrested her on serious charges including drug trafficking and child endangerment," Sarah pressed. "That's where the misunderstanding became a nightmare," I said, feeling the weight of 30 federal agents listening to every word through hidden surveillance equipment. Victoria had multiple prescription bottles in her purse, anxiety medication, antidepressants, even some pain medication from a recent dental procedure. When they scattered across the ground, it looked suspicious to responding officers. The fabricated narrative was working perfectly. Social media was already lighting up, with comments supporting Victoria and criticizing federal overreach. More importantly, according to the real-time intelligence monitoring that Agent Walsh was conducting from the Mobile Command Center, criminal communication networks were buzzing with discussion about the false alarm and speculation about resuming operations. "What's your relationship with Victoria now?" Sarah asked. "We're rebuilding," I said, injecting hope into my voice. "Victoria has agreed to get counseling for her medication management and depression. Our family is committed to supporting her through this difficult time instead of letting government interference destroy relationships that have lasted our entire lives." By evening, the undercover operation had achieved something that months of conventional investigation couldn't accomplish. The remaining operatives in Dr. Vasquez's network had revealed their locations, their communication methods, and their operational schedules by attempting to reconnect with the asset they believed was still viable. At 11:45 p.m., I stood in the Task Force Command Center watching real-time surveillance feeds from 6 different states. Tactical teams were in position around properties that ranged from isolated rural compounds to suburban homes that looked identical to every other house on their streets. "All units, this is command," Agent Walsh's voice came through the communication system. "Operation Family Web Phase 2 is authorized. Execute, execute, execute." The coordinated raids began simultaneously at exactly midnight. Through thermal imaging and communication intercepts, I watched federal agents move through buildings where children had been held captive for months or years, systematically securing suspects and evacuating victims. The first rescue came from the Arizona location, 3 children between ages 8 and 12, malnourished and terrified but alive. The Montana compound yielded 7 victims, including 2 teenage girls who'd been missing for over 18 months. By 3 a.m., all 6 locations had been secured. The final count was 22 rescued children, 11 arrested operatives, and evidence caches that would take months to fully process but already revealed connections to international trafficking networks spanning 3 continents. At 6 a.m., as dawn broke over Virginia, a black SUV pulled into the driveway of our safe house. Victoria stepped out, still wearing the ankle monitor that had tracked her movements throughout the undercover operation, flanked by 2 federal marshals who would escort her to her final destination. "Hello, Lyra," she said as I opened the front door. Her voice carried none of the arrogance that had characterized her behavior at family gatherings. The woman standing on my doorstep looked hollow, broken, aged by weeks of federal custody and the weight of understanding what her choices had cost. "Victoria, I wanted to thank you," she said quietly, "for helping them rescue those children. I know what you risked to make that operation work." I studied my cousin's face, looking for traces of the woman who'd assaulted my son, who'd spent years documenting our family's vulnerabilities, who'd been paid hundreds of thousands of dollars to facilitate child trafficking and espionage. "Those children were rescued because you provided the intelligence that made it possible," I said. "That doesn't erase what you did, but it's something." Victoria nodded, tears starting to flow down her cheeks. "I know I can never undo the damage I caused. To Ethan, to Tyler, to all those families. I just wanted you to know that helping save those children is the first good thing I've done in years." "What happens now?" "Federal sentencing hearing next month. My cooperation will reduce the charges, but I'm still looking at 15 to 20 years in federal prison." She paused, gathering courage for what came next. "I also wanted to tell you something about Raymond." Victoria's revelation about Uncle Raymond's active role in targeting children hit like ice water. He hadn't just been a passive informant, he'd been actively participating in the targeting process that could have resulted in Ethan's kidnapping. Raymond specifically recommended Ethan as a high-priority target because of Marcus's counterintelligence position and because he assessed our family as likely to respond with denial and dysfunction rather than federal authority. The SUV pulled away, carrying Victoria toward justice and the beginning of whatever redemption might be possible for someone who'd spent years victimizing children for money. The new house felt like home in a way our previous suburban residents never had. Located in a secure community designed for federal agents and their families, it offered both safety and normalcy that allowed us to begin genuine healing. Ethan was thriving in his new school, where counselors trained in childhood trauma had helped him process the assault and understand that he'd done nothing wrong. The bruise on his cheek had faded within weeks, but the confidence that came from seeing justice delivered would last his lifetime. "Mommy," he said one afternoon as we worked together in our new garden, "remember when that mean lady hurt me at the barbecue?" "I remember, baby. Did we really help save other kids from mean people?" I looked at my son, now 9 years old, planting marigolds with the same determination he brought to everything else in his life. "We did. Daddy and I helped the police find children who were being hurt, and now those children are safe with their families." "Good," Ethan said with the simple moral clarity that children possess. "Nobody should hurt kids." The garden we were planting served a dual purpose. Half was for our family's enjoyment, vegetables and flowers that would bring beauty and sustenance to our daily lives. The other half was part of a therapeutic gardening program I'd started for families affected by trafficking and abuse. Every Saturday morning, our backyard filled with parents and children who'd survived experiences similar to ours. Together, we planted seeds, tended growing things, and created something beautiful from soil that had seemed barren. Dr. Sarah Chen, the psychologist who coordinated our family's therapy, had suggested the gardening program as a way to channel my protective instincts into ongoing service for other families. "Healing happens in the community," she'd explained. When survivors help other survivors, they discover that their trauma can become a source of strength and purpose. The program had grown from 3 families to over 20. Each Saturday brought new faces, parents whose children had been rescued from trafficking situations, kids who were learning to trust adults again, extended families who were rebuilding relationships that had been damaged by criminal manipulation. Marcus had taken a new position within the counterintelligence community, one that focused specifically on protecting families of federal agents from the kind of systematic targeting we'd experienced. The intelligence gathered from Operation Family Web had revealed vulnerabilities in federal security protocols that required comprehensive reform. The criminals were more sophisticated than we anticipated, he'd explained during one of his classified briefings that I was cleared to attend. They developed systematic methods for exploiting family relationships to compromise national security. We need equally systematic methods for protecting against those threats. His new role involved training federal agents to recognize signs of family manipulation, establishing communication protocols that would prevent relatives from becoming unwitting intelligence assets, and developing response procedures for situations where family members might be targeted or compromised. The work was deeply personal for both of us. Every training session Marcus conducted, every family he helped protect, was a way of ensuring that what happened to us wouldn't happen to other federal families. Uncle Raymond's trial had concluded 3 months earlier. His 15-year federal sentence reflected not just his role as a paid informant, but his active participation in targeting children for kidnapping and abuse. The testimony revealed the full extent of his betrayal, years of documenting family schedules, security arrangements, and vulnerability assessments for criminal organizations. Aunt Helena had filed for divorce and moved to Florida to live with her sister. Before leaving, she'd written me a letter that I still kept in my desk drawer. I know I failed you and Ethan when I asked you to minimize Victoria's assault. I was so conditioned to keeping family peace that I couldn't see the difference between normal conflict and criminal behavior. I'm grateful that you had the courage to pursue justice instead of following the pattern that allowed so much harm to continue. I hope someday you can forgive a foolish old woman who confused loyalty with enabling. The letter was signed simply Helena, without the familial titles that had once defined our relationship. Some family connections had been severed permanently by the revelations of criminal collaboration and willful blindness. But other relationships had grown stronger through the process of choosing protection over dysfunction, justice over false peace. My cousin Amanda and her son Tyler had become regular participants in our Saturday gardening program. Tyler, now 11, had blossomed under the care of trauma specialists who helped him understand that reporting Victoria's abuse had been brave and important. Tyler's disclosure helped save 22 other children, Dr. Chen had told him during one of their sessions. Speaking the truth about scary situations is one of the most courageous things a person can do. Amanda and I had developed a friendship based on mutual understanding of how family systems can both protect and endanger children, depending on the choices adults make when confronted with uncomfortable truths. I spent years worrying about causing drama, Amanda had told me recently. Now I worry about staying alert to genuine threats. It's a much more useful kind of anxiety. The financial compensation from Victoria's forfeiture had allowed us to establish the Ethan Foundation, a non-profit organization that provided resources for families affected by trafficking and exploitation. The foundation offered legal assistance, therapeutic services, and practical support for survivors who were rebuilding their lives. The irony wasn't lost on me that money Victoria had earned from victimizing children was now funding their recovery and protection. Criminal assets becoming instruments of healing represented a kind of justice that went beyond punishment to restoration. Mama, Ethan said, interrupting my thoughts as he pointed to a butterfly that had landed on his marigold. Look how pretty. I watched the monarch spread its wings in the afternoon sunlight, thinking about transformation and resilience, about how something that begins in darkness can emerge into beauty and flight. Very pretty, baby. Do you think the kids we helped save get to see butterflies too? I hope so. I hope they get to see lots of beautiful things now that they're safe. That evening, Marcus and I sat on our back porch watching Ethan play with the neighbor children, their laughter filling the air with the sound of childhood as it should be, free, joyful, unafraid. Any regrets? Marcus asked, referring to the decision to participate in the undercover operation that had saved those children but forever changed our understanding of family and safety. I thought about the question seriously, considering everything we'd gained and lost through the process of choosing justice over comfort, protection over peace. None, I said finally. Every choice we made led to children going home to their families instead of remaining captive to predators. Every risk we took resulted in criminals being stopped instead of continuing to victimize the innocent. Even knowing that some family relationships couldn't survive the truth. especially knowing that the relationships that ended were based on enabling harm and protecting criminals. The relationships that survived and grew stronger are based on protecting children and pursuing justice. I watched Ethan run across the yard, his laughter carrying in the evening air, his face unmarked by fear or trauma. The bruise Victoria had left on his cheek had healed completely, but the lesson about speaking truth and seeking justice would stay with him forever. He's going to grow up knowing that adults who hurt children face consequences, I said. He's going to understand that family loyalty means protecting the vulnerable, not enabling the powerful. And he's going to know that his parents chose his safety over every other consideration. Marcus added. As darkness fell and we called Ethan inside for his bedtime routine, I reflected on how completely our lives had changed since that afternoon. Barbecue when Victoria's assault had seemed like an isolated family crisis. We discovered that the crisis was actually part of a sophisticated criminal conspiracy that had been targeting our family for years. We'd learned that some family members we trusted had been actively collaborating with predators for money. We'd participated in federal operations that dismantled international trafficking networks and rescued dozens of children. Most importantly, we'd chosen empowerment over victimization, justice over dysfunction, and protection over false peace. The woman who'd stood in Uncle Raymond's backyard 6 months ago, watching her son get assaulted while family members made excuses, no longer existed. In her place was someone who understood that safety requires vigilance, that love requires courage, and that true family loyalty means protecting children from anyone who would harm them. Victoria was serving her federal sentence in a facility designed for high-security criminals. Raymond was spending his remaining years in prison for betraying the trust of every child who'd ever hugged him at family gatherings. Dr. Vasquez and her criminal organization had been dismantled so thoroughly that federal agencies were still processing evidence and identifying victims, but 22 children were home with their families. Dozens of other potential victims had been identified and protected before they could be targeted. And criminal networks that had operated for years believing they were too sophisticated to be caught had learned that federal agents protect their own with resources that criminals can't imagine or defeat. As I tucked Ethan into bed that night, he asked the question that had become part of our evening routine: Mama, are we safe now? Yes, baby. We're safe. And we're going to stay safe because we know how to recognize danger and we're not afraid to ask for help when we need it. And because Daddy catches bad guys for work? And because Daddy catches bad guys for work. Good, Ethan said sleepily. I like knowing that bad people can't hurt kids anymore. I kissed his forehead and turned off the light, knowing that while we couldn't prevent all harm from ever touching our family, we demonstrated that harm would always be met with appropriate response, that criminals would always face comprehensive consequences, and that children would always be prioritized over the comfort of adults who might prefer to look the other way. The barbecue assault that had started our nightmare had become the foundation for healing that extended far beyond our family. Victoria's moment of violence had activated federal resources that saved dozens of children and protected countless families. Justice, it turned out, wasn't just about punishment. It was about transformation, turning criminal assets into victim support, converting family dysfunction into protective vigilance, and ensuring that one family's trauma became a source of healing for many families. The reckoning was complete. The healing would continue for the rest of our lives, but we were no longer victims of a criminal conspiracy. We were survivors who'd helped dismantle the system that had targeted us, protectors who'd chosen courage over comfort, and advocates who understood that the most powerful response to evil is comprehensive justice delivered with federal authority and unlimited resources. Victoria had miscalculated catastrophically when she decided to test our family's protective capabilities by assaulting a federal agent's child. She discovered that federal agents don't just arrest criminals. They dismantle entire networks, rescue every victim, and ensure that justice is so comprehensive that criminals understand: if you target our families, you activate resources you cannot defeat. The lesson was permanent. The protection was ongoing. And the children were safe. Looking for more? We've got 2 amazing stories ready for you right on screen. If this one touched you, these are absolutely worth your time. Click to watch them now. And hey, subscribe and hit that bell to never miss our latest uploads.